So we are recording this meeting for those who aren't able to attend but wanting to get the information. So just know that we're going to have a Q&A toward the end. If you feel more comfortable putting your questions in the chat instead of unmuting for the recording, that is totally fine. Um, but we'll give it just a couple of more minutes, maybe till 12:04, let people kind of get in before we start. And I'll give the RAFI staff some time to introduce ourselves too in just a few minutes. But yeah, get comfortable, get your lunches if you're eating lunch right now. Yes, happy Tuesday. And then when you're able to, I always like to know like where people are coming from. So if you can put like what city and state you're in, that would be awesome just to kind of know what we're looking like. And so I can start. Salem. And yeah, it is totally fine to leave your camera off if you're more comfortable that way. I will never ask people to turn their cameras on because I understand that in this world, day and age, we're often on Zoom, so it's nice to be able to turn the camera off and just listen. Totally understandable, especially with internet connection being bad. All right, we're at the 12:04 mark. Hope if anyone else joins, you can just admit them. I think you can do that as co-host. But yeah, I'm gonna let the RAFI staff on the call introduce ourselves. You've probably seen our names floating around on emails and Zoom invites, but my name's Angel Woodrum and I'm the awards manager at RAFI. I'll be walking us through a presentation and then doing some Q&A at the end. And I'll let Hope introduce herself.
Hi guys, I'm Hope and I am the FOCN or Farmers of Color Network Communications Coordinator. And I will pass it over to Bianca.
Oh no. Are you able to unmute? I might have. Oh no. Okay, now you should be able to.
Oh, hey everybody, just kidding. I'm Bianca. I'm RAFI's Farmers of Color Network Coordinator and happy to be here. Pass it to you, Angel.
All righty. All right. So let me just do one thing before I start sharing. All right. So I'm going to start sharing. Hope and Bianca are going to monitor the chat. So if you have any questions that come up, feel free to throw them in there and we will try to get all of those answered. I think we'll have plenty of time toward the end to answer all the questions, but definitely throw your questions in the chat for the time being. And I will start sharing and get on with the webinar. Right, sweet. Can you all see my screen? Everything look good? Look normal. Okay, great. So welcome to the grant writing webinar put on by RAFI. So as some of you may know, RAFI does have our own farmer grant cycle that we do every year. So this webinar is really geared toward those grants that we'll talk about in detail, but I did want to just cover kind of grants over a broad scope as well. So we'll chat about that for a little bit and then get really into the nitty gritty of the RAFI farmer grants. Great. So I did want to just start and introduce who RAFI is. I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with our organization, but it stands for Rural Advancement Foundation International, which is confusing because we are not a foundation, nor do we work international too much. But that being said, we're a nonprofit organization who challenges the root causes of unjust food systems by supporting and advocating for economically, racially, and ecologically just farm communities. So that is a very big mission statement. And so I have listed our programs here below so you can kind of get a feel for the work that RAFI does. I would say our work's kind of categorized into three buckets. One being more policy focused. So we have our like challenging corporate power program, our farm policy program, and those programs are really advocating for just policies for small mid-scale farmers. And then we have our faith community work that our Come to the Table program does, and they're working on narrative change work with faith communities surrounding hunger relief. They also partner different faith communities with farmers to do different hunger relief efforts, as well as just educational opportunities, community building opportunities. And then these programs with stars by them are, I think, especially relevant to farmers who I imagine make up most of this call. So we have our resources for resilient farmers. This includes our work with helping farmers access different USDA agencies and programs. We also have a farmer hotline under our farm advocacy program. And so that's really assisting farmers that are in some kind of financial crisis. Maybe a disaster crisis has happened and they're looking for resources. That's a great avenue to call on. And then we have our Farmers of Color Network. And that's who is putting on this webinar. They do a lot of work around education, around connecting farmers with other farmers, doing that kind of information sharing and community building as well. Right. So with that really big overview of RAFI, I wanted to just look at the agenda so you kind of know what's coming up here. So we're going to talk briefly about what are grants, how do they work, what's kind of the general understanding of what a grant is. We're going to look at a couple of different types of grants, including federal grants. And then we're going to dive right into, I want to apply for one of RAFI Farmers Grants. How do I do that? So we're going to be looking at the application requirements, the process, some tips for making a really strong application. So yeah, we can jump right into what are grants. So essentially boiled down, grants are free money, right? It is money that is going to, in this case, for this audience, going to farmers or a collaborative of farmers. They're usually competitive, right? Because who doesn't, like what farmer does not need money to invest in their operation, right? And so for that reason, there's usually a lot of applicants. And so they can get quite competitive. I put 6% here in this, in these parentheses, just to demonstrate the point that for us last year, we did a grant cycle. We got about 1,000 applications, and only half of those applicants were eligible. So, that means we were looking at 500 eligible applications. Of that many, 15 were funded. So that is a very small percentage. So I did just want to demonstrate that point up front, that grants can be very, very competitive. So just have that in mind as you're going into a grant application. It's not that your application may be bad or your project isn't a good idea. It's just that competitive nature of grants. So that moves into the next point of there's usually some kind of eligibility criteria for grants. And we'll get into RAFI's eligibility criteria later, because every organization has different eligibility criteria. Every grant has some kind of application process. It could be as simple as apply for this grant, we'll get back to you in a couple of months. But over here on these numbers, I did want to show kind of the steps that are usually involved behind the scenes in a grant application process. So first, your grant's open. That means, the organization has done a social media post, the application link is live, things are ready to go. And there sometimes, not all the time, there's like a letter of inquiry phase where a organization will, instead of having an open application process, they will invite certain people or organizations to apply. And that usually looks like a mini application called a letter of inquiry. And then you may be invited to do a full application if it looks like your goals match what the funder's goals are. And so that moves into step 2, where applicants will complete their applications by the deadline. Sometimes applications are open for 3 months, sometimes they're open for a month, sometimes they're open anywhere in between that time. And sometimes applications are super breezy to answer. You have your farm information, your contact information. They ask you, different small questions. Other times, I'm thinking specifically of like some USDA grants can be very detail oriented, where it might take you a month to really get a month and multiple people to really complete that application. RAFI's application is not like that, which we'll get into later. And then after applications are done being accepted, that window closes. There's a review process which takes place. Usually this is done by an external review committee to the organization. So in RAFI's example, we don't review the applications. We get other farmers, maybe former grantees, different ag professionals. We ask them to do that scoring for us to kind of take away any bias we may have, because we have more of a connection to the farmers applying than external people do. And then finally, we're moving into that finalist round where there might be a short list of potential people who will be funded. And you do a process referred to as due diligence. So that's really just making sure that the applicant is who they say they are, right? We want to make sure they actually have a farm, that they are allowed, if they're leasing land, we want to make sure they're allowed to build structures on that farm. And yeah, just really making sure the person says that who they say they are is who they are, to make sure we're not funding anyone who's not a farmer, for instance. And then finally, awards are made, emails go out, contracts are signed, checks are written out. So very brief overview of that process. Something else about grants that I think is important to note is that organizations are usually looking for specific projects to fund. Again, in the case of RAFI's grants, we're looking for projects that will help the longevity of your farm. We want farmers to stay farming. So we have kind of a broad understanding of what that may mean. Some organizations are way more narrowly focused, like you are in this grant is to help you install X at your farm, at your place of work, whatever the case may be. And then that kind of goes into having a mission around the funds. And so for RAFI, for example, we are committed to working with historically underserved farmers as defined by NRCS. And other organizations may have different groups they work with, different states they work with, even counties too. I've seen different ag committees, food councils will usually be bound by county with the funds that they're putting out. And finally, there is reporting that you have to do for grants, just to show that you are using the funds in a way that is allowed. Some of these reports can get more detailed than others. I will say RAFI's is pretty simple. We just want to see how things are going, make sure, if you have any hurdles you're trying to get over, see if we can help with that. And then there's also sometimes a site visit required. That's usually for grants that are for larger amounts, just part of that due diligence process of making sure that the organization or farm is who they say they are. All right. So types of grants. there's way more than just these two types of grants. But I know from working at RAFI, the grants that we get questions about from our the farmers we work with are really two different kinds of grants. That's federal grants. So very dependent on government funding, which I'm sure some of you all have heard. A lot of the grant programs have been halted, paused for now. But these federal grants are usually given to organizations to then do programming around different groups within their community. Another really popular federal grant that farmers will go for are any kind of NRCS grants, like a cost share program, for example, if you're wanting to install a high tunnel. NRCS does have funds for that every year. Those open up. And sometimes those are reimbursement based, is what they're called. So it's where the grant awardee will front the cost to do whatever project it is. So say it is a high tunnel, they will front the cost, build that high tunnel. Once that high tunnel is done and inspected, those funds will be reimbursed to them. That is not something RAFI does. So we fall into this category of re-granting, and that's exactly what it sounds like. We have funds that we are granted, they're designated to go to farmers. So we're re-granting grant funds. So yep, that's RAFI grants. They're for RAFI, these are not reimbursement based at all. And these also are very dependent on what the funds look like for an organization year to year, which in the nonprofit world, of course, can fluctuate year to year. So that's kind of a big overview of grants. So now we're kind of gonna dig deeper into RAFI's specific grants, of which we have three farmer grants that we do, which is Beginning Farmer Stipend, Infrastructure Grant, and Caribbean Infrastructure Grant. And we're gonna go deeper into each one of these so you can see the eligibility requirements, as well as understand the application process. So we're gonna dive right into the application process here, to chat about what that looks like, try to like demystify that. I know like some people who maybe aren't on their computer all the time, like can get intimidated by grant applications. So we really just want to demystify that, let you know what it looks like going into our specific application so that you can not feel stressed just thinking about the application. So like I said, last year for our grant cycle, about 50% of the people who applied were ineligible. The application, I actually looked at the average time it took to complete. It was about an hour and a half. So we do not want farmers spending their precious time doing an application that they're not eligible for. So even though we had the eligibility requirements listed, there may have been misunderstanding, there may have not looked at that, whatever the case may be. We don't want that to happen this year. So we have a mandatory eligibility quiz now that every applicant is expected to take. There is one exception for a grant that I'll get to later. But once you complete your quiz, RAFI staff will then review your answers, see if you're eligible, and send you a link. So this is not an automated process. This is actually like human beings looking at your eligibility quiz so that we can catch different things. So say like you're a farmer who took the beginning farmer eligibility quiz, but you're actually a better fit for the infrastructure grant, we can let you know that. That way you're not having to take both eligibility quizzes to determine what you're eligible for. So real humans will be looking at it to be able to assist you. So if you are eligible, you'll be sent an application link. So again, you have to take that quiz to get a link to the application because we would rather you take a 10-minute quiz than spend almost 2 hours doing an application that people aren't going to read because you're not eligible. Which again, just because you're eligible does not mean you're automatically funded. That process is still just as competitive. Again, we had 500 eligible applications and funded 15 people. So really, want to be transparent about the volume of applications we get. And then step 4 in this process, applications are reviewed by an external panel of farmers and ag professionals. This is a really important point that I'm probably going to repeat myself on a lot, just because we want farmers to know that we're not the ones reading these. And so we want you to really put your best foot forward, and we want our reviewers to get a sense of who you are, what your farm is, what your project is. Because I think RAFI staff can fill in those gaps just from working with different farmers. Some farmers that apply, we have worked directly with, we've been to their farms, we know who they are. So we really just want the applicants to put their best foot forward for these external people as well. So again, just that last point is the highly competitive nature of this grant process. So this slide, I'm going to get into looking at what the application is asking. What should you be prepared to answer when you're sitting down to complete your application? So the first probably half or so of the application is multi-select or checkbox questions. It's asking you your address, your farm name, all of those kinds of questions, as well as asking you what products you produce, where you sell your products, different things like that. If you have a farm number, if you file a Schedule F, all of those kinds of questions is what that first portion of the application. That's something you could answer really easily. It doesn't take much time to get through that section of the application. And then on the back end of the application, there are some open-ended questions. These take a bit more time to answer, and there isn't a ton of word count allowed. And so you kind of have to be strategic in what you want to share in those areas. So you really have to kind of boil your project down to the important details. And again, that is those open-ended questions, not something you can just breeze through, unfortunately, but something you'll have to sit with, think about, maybe draft a couple of responses before submitting. Number 3 is reference information. So in the past, if anyone on the call has applied to a RAFI grant before, we've asked for reference letters. We don't want to do that this year. We want to make it kind of streamlined, one less thing for the applicants to think about. So we just ask, similar to a job application, we just want one reference contact information, and that person cannot be family, but they could really be anyone else, anyone who can speak to your history of farming, your dedication to farming. It could be a mentor, it could be an extension agent, it could be, if you sell at a farmer's market, it could be a market manager, really anyone else. So we're just wanting their phone number, name, email address. And then we do ask for a quote for a part of your project. For example, if your project is you're wanting to build a cold storage unit, you could get a quote for an AC unit and or the actual materials you're going to use to build that. We just want to see that you have done your research, you understand materials it takes to complete your project. And then the last thing the application will ask for that is also pretty time consuming is a budget and timeline. So we're really looking for, so we're imagining checks will go out in maybe early July. And so we want to see mid-July, you're starting to work on X. In August, you're working on whatever. So we want to see that you've really thought out the steps you're going to take to complete your project, and you also have a relative understanding of how much time and funds the project will take. And we really tell our review committee to pay attention to if anything sounds weird, right? We have asked farmers to be on the review committee because they're going to be able to catch anything that seems weird. Like if you're building a deer fence and you ask for materials that will not keep deer out, we want our reviewers to be able to catch that in the process. So that budget and timeline is super important. All right, so that's what the application is asking. So now I wanted to get into what we're looking for or what we're telling our review committee to look for in these applications. So like I said previously, we want the review committee to understand your farm. They're not going to understand every single aspect of who you are and what your farm is, but we do want them to know like what you grow, how you grow it, where you sell it, how long you've been farming, just kind of a basic outline like that. We also want the review panel to walk away with no questions. And I just happened to see this in the chat, so I can answer it now. I just looked at the right time. A fellow farmer can absolutely be a reference. That is absolutely allowed. And so we, going back to number 2 here, we want the review panel to know, or like walk away from your application with no questions. I can speak to this a little bit where when I first started at RAFI, I helped do kind of a first pass at reviewing the applications. And that was really just checking for eligibility, making sure all the sections were filled out. And there were so many applications I walked away from being like, this person is such like a dedicated, awesome, like farmer, but I have no idea what they're going to spend this money on. Like they're asking for $10,000 and they didn't say like what they were building, what they were like investing that money into. So don't do that. I think it's way more important for you to have like a pretty boringly written application if it shows that you are very goal driven, you know what your farm needs to get to that next level of whatever success may look like for you. So knowing those details, showing that you know those details, you've done your research, super, super important for the review process. We also want our review committee to know that you know how to implement that project. So if you're doing an irrigation system, say you want to make it more efficient to water your crops. What we're asking the review committee to look at is make sure they're, getting the right materials for one, their cost listed sounds about right, even if it's not spot on, and know that you have the skills to then implement that project. So, you can get technical and say like, I don't know enough about digging wells and whatnot, but, use, whatever vocabulary you need to use to get the point across that you know what you're doing. And farmers know a lot about their own operations. So, just talk as if you're speaking to another farmer about your project. And I think that'll get the point across very well. So getting into writing the application, some of this might be repetitive from the last slide, but just to highlight the big 3 points here is be detailed like it matters. And being detailed isn't necessarily the same as writing a lot. For me, for example, when I'm thinking about details and doing some like project planning, I like to just like make a numbered list. That is fine if you do that. Like if that's how your brain works, that is absolutely fine. We're telling our review committee, don't grade this like you're a professor. We don't care if these people are good writers, if they're conveying their project clearly, their goals clearly. That is exactly what we want. So again, bulleted list, if that works for you, that is absolutely fine. Another thing here is like, don't rush. So this application, like I said, the average time to complete it was about 90 minutes. So know that going in, do that when you have like that chunk of time to sit down and really like showcase your farm and your project in the best way that you can. And then lastly, oh, well, I've said this already. So it takes an hour or more to complete. So know that going in. Don't wait until an hour before the deadline and try to do it because we will close the application on you. We apologize in advance unless there's like a technical issue. We will close the application. All right, some tips. Everyone I think is always looking for like good tips to go into stuff with. And so just reflecting with the grant team in the past, so people who helped do grants in the past at RAFI, I kind of gathered some good information from them for this slide. And it really just comes down to the detail orientedness and clear communication, but I tried to parse out some more concrete things. So something that a RAFI staff member suggested, which I think is a great idea, is looking at the whole application first. Our software is set up where you can click through the whole application without answering the questions first, even though they are required. It allows you to kind of click back and forth between pages without answering every question first. That is a great thing to do because you can, see what those open-ended questions are asking, think on them a little bit, come back maybe an hour later or so and start typing. I think that is a very helpful hint. And as well as just kind of drafting your answer. So pull up a Word document. If you like handwriting, get your notebook out. You can just start making lists, scratching things out, trying to make like a really detailed answer to those questions. And also try to think about if you were not writing this and you were to read it, would it make sense to you? That's always a great like proofread thing to keep in mind. Proofread before submission. Again, this, I wouldn't say proofread necessarily for every single typo. It's fine if your application has some misspellings, like it's fine. But something to really pay attention to when you're proofreading is timeline. So we say in the application our expected dates to get payments out to grantees. So if that timeline says you can expect your first payment in July, don't then say you're going to start working on something in March of 2025 because you won't have the funds yet. And another thing is pay attention to when we expect the project to be completed. For these grants, it's the end of the year, so literally the last day of 2025. So don't say you're going to start working in February 2026 because by then, like we will expect your project to be done. So proofread for things like that more so than making your writing totally error-free. We understand things like that happen. And then account for large problems in tech. This was a big issue last year that I didn't have to deal with, but Bianca sadly did on the call. So we had our deadline for someday at 5 p.m. At 5 p.m., Bianca gets many calls from many people because our software crashed that we were collecting applications on. So don't be one of those people who your application doesn't go through because Form Assembly has crashed. And tech problems happen, we understand, which is why we moved our deadline to 1 p.m. Eastern time this year, or it might be noon, whatever it is, it's listed on here. But we moved it there because we do expect there to be some 1 p.m. Thank you, Bianca. So we do expect there to be some glitches along the way right at that deadline. So we wanted to give ourselves time to get phone calls, emails, but we're hoping it doesn't happen this year. So submit early, account for issues like that. If you have any issues along the way as you're doing your application, there is a number to call, an email to email that we'll get into a bit later here. Right. So that's it for our kind of like tips and tricks portion of this. So now we're gonna, and I do want to leave time for questions. So I'm gonna go through this relatively quickly, but still make sure you get all the information you need. But yeah, we're gonna look at the 3 different grants that RAFI offers. And I put them all here side by side to start with, just so you can see. I think at least for me, it's easier to look at things comparatively so I can see which bucket I fall into. So we have our beginning farmer stipend here. This is for farmers who have been farming less than 3 years. And I'll also add that beginning farmer is different than like aspirational farmer. So we are looking for farmers who are currently farming. They will start farming their own operation in 2025. That's what we're looking for beginning farmers. We're looking for farmers in the Southeast. We have a list of states in which that applies to on our website and eligibility quiz and some other places. The beginning farmer stipend does require that you take the eligibility quiz first, and the awards are up to 5,000. So it's 3,000 to 5,000 are the grant amounts for that. Infrastructure grant. I think this is probably the one that most people have heard of RAFI doing. It's one we've been doing the longest. And so this is for farmers who have been farming as a owner, co-owner for 3 or more years. They're farming in the Southeast as well. There is an eligibility quiz for this one. And this award is up to 10,000. So if you're looking to take the eligibility quiz when it opens up, say you go on our website, a really easy way to know what quiz you should take is just answer the question, how long have you been farming? If you fall into beginning farmer, you'll take that quiz. If you fall into infrastructure, you'll take that quiz. And then we have our Caribbean infrastructure grant. It is for farmers farming 3 years or more, farming in Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands. So this grant does not have a quiz because we have not had a problem with ineligible applicants. There's hardly any people who are ineligible because of that location requirement is so strict. So haven't had a problem with that. There is no quiz there. These are up to 5,000, and that's really just funding wise. We hope to up these grants at some point, but for now they are 5,000. All right. So diving a little bit more into beginning farmer. So as I said, we are looking for people who are actively farming or starting their farm business in 2025. So an application, we do ask on this application, like what are steps you've taken to begin your farm business? And we list a lot of different options, such as you finished at least one season, you have a website, you have some kind of business structure established already, things like that. We're really looking for farmers who, or applicants who are currently farming and not just hoping to farm in the near future. Location we talked about. And then what can this grant cover? So we're really wanting to cover like startup cost for farmers. That can be a lot of stuff. You know, if you're someone who's leasing land, it could go toward helping that. If you're someone who uses a lot of compost, fertilizer, things like that, it can go toward that. Things that we're not really funding is those more like professional development opportunities. For example, someone thought of this example, but if you're wanting to do like a farm tour of the Southeast to learn about farming, that's not something that these funds are meant to be used for, although a great idea if you're wanting to do that. Applications are opening in February. We do have a date we've been saying internally, but we're waiting on a few other outside pieces to fall together. So as soon as those applications are ready to be announced, they will be announced through our social media, through our newsletter. So definitely make sure you're either following or subscribed to our newsletter to get those announcements. Infrastructure, digging a little deeper into this grant. So yeah, farming 3 years or more and have been at your current location for 2 years. That's just, you know, looking for that commitment on the farmer's end. Something very important that we haven't touched on yet here is if you lease land, you are absolutely able to apply for the infrastructure grant. However, your project does need to be mobile. That's just because we want to support you as a farmer for as long as you are going to farm. So we don't want you to build a permanent structure on land that you're leasing, and then a few years down the line, maybe you decide to buy land and can't take it with you. We really want, it to be mobile. And so that could look like, if you're building a cold storage area or like cool bot unit, like that's absolutely you can take that with you. We had someone actually build a bathroom at their farm that they really needed. And she was able to make that mobile because she was leasing land, which is super awesome. So yeah, just keep that in mind if you're someone who leases land and you're applying for this grant. We really want you to be able to hold on to that infrastructure as your farm grows. Applications will open 2 weeks after the beginning farmer stipend, and that's really just for RAFI capacity. We get hit with a lot of grant questions, a lot of technical difficulties, so we're trying to stagger the application process slightly. All right. Caribbean infrastructure grants. So not too much here to add. So yeah, applications will open when the infrastructure application opens, up to 5,000. Again, if you're leasing land, needs to be mobile, farming 3 years or more at your current location for 2 similar to infrastructure. And yeah, so getting more into the project side of things, and a lot of this is repetitive, so I'll kind of breeze through it. But we're looking for projects that will increase a farm's profitability, longevity, and community impact. So yes, definitely looking for projects to make the farmer's life more easier so that they continue farming, right? We want your farms to have a lasting impact for you, for your community. We've talked about commitment from the farmer is not being aspirational, but actually doing the work. Grant funds should not go toward paying a farmer's salary. So that point is really like we're wanting these funds to be reinvested on your farm so that your farm can be more profitable in the coming years. I also put printing merch here. It doesn't necessarily mean you can't do any marketing campaign with these funds. Like if you have a really good outline of a marketing campaign that is going to make your farm more profitable, that is absolutely allowed. But don't write an application that's like, I'm going to print 10,000 t-shirts and then not explain why you're doing that. So yeah, we talked about projects that make sense. We have these links here that you can't click on because we're on Zoom, but those will be available on our webpage once they're ready to launch. And we'll, I imagine, send out an email. We'll at least send the recording out so you can go back to this slide. We do have a grants@rafiusa.org email address. Email your questions there. Bianca and I check that email. We wanted to keep all the grant stuff separate so that nothing slips by us in the everyday, day-to-day RAFI things. We also have this phone number here. It goes to our office, so that extension is 206 to get someone to help you with grants. So that was a lot of information. I'm going to stop sharing there and answer questions. So I know Bianca and Hope were keeping track of questions. So yeah, I'll let you all just sprinkle some questions, and thanks for joining us, Nicole.
Oh, there were a couple of questions I put over in that document so that you guys can take a look at it and you can answer them. The very first one, you answered the one about can a reference be a fellow farmer? So we've answered that one. Another question that was asked is, does the competitiveness of the grant mean people just starting out won't be considered?
That is a great question. So that's not necessarily true. If you're eligible, your application is going to be reviewed by an external panel. So absolutely, like if you're launching, so to be eligible for that beginning farmer stipend, if you're just starting out, I imagine that would mean you have some land, you're ready to start growing, but maybe you just haven't done your first market yet, or you haven't made your first restaurant sale, or whatever the case may be. You will still absolutely be considered. And so I would say to make your application more competitive, if you're just starting out, I would recommend, really taking the time to set up a website, set up, if you use social media, do a social media account, just to show that commitment to the review committee. We do also have a question on the beginning farmer application that asks you for your farm history. So if you're someone who has worked at a lot of farms over the past 5-10 years and you're just now starting your own farm, we do want the review committee to know that you have that knowledge, you have worked in weather conditions before, you're committed to being a farmer. We want them to know that. So we do have a space for that. So even if you haven't been an owner of a farm, we do want the review committee to understand that you know what you're doing. You're ready to start your own farm.
Next question that I have for you is, it says, I noticed you didn't mention a farm number as a reference to how long a person has been farming. So could someone have been farming for 3 years, but only had a farm number for a portion of that?
Yes, great question. These are very specific, awesome questions. So thank you all. Yes, if you could apply for a farm number. So my thoughts are forming in my head. For the eligibility quiz, we do ask for the infrastructure in particular that you have a farm ID. So if at the time of that quiz, you could have gotten it the day before you take the quiz. If you take that quiz and you have a farm number and you've been farming for 5 years, but you've had a farm number for a day, you are eligible. And that farm number question is really just, so we've had applications in the past of people who they own land, but they're not farming and they want to apply for a grant. We don't want that to happen. We want these funds to go to people who are farming. So that's really just that commitment piece of, making sure that farmers are dedicated to farming. They're wanting to be farm businesses of that kind of nature. So absolutely, if you've only had a farm number for 12 hours at the time of answering that question, you're eligible. And we don't even ask how long you've had a farm number, so the review committee won't see that information anyway.
The next question that I can answer is, will the slides and recording be emailed? And that is yes. And does anyone else have a question they want to ask?
I can make it where people can unmute themselves. Oh, I think I already did. So people should be able to unmute themselves if you want to, or just add to the chat. Sweet. So as you all think of questions, or you may not have any, which is also fine, Bianca and Hope, if you have anything you would add to my presentation, please do. But I do see a question in the chat. Do you only give grants to people of color? So the definition or the criteria that we're using is historically underserved farmers, as defined by NRCS. I'll see if I can pull that website up really quick. And so one criteria that they define as being historically underserved is race-based. So it's under socially disadvantaged farmer or rancher on that link. But others can fall into this category too. So like veteran farmers who have been owning their farm operation for less than 10 years, for example. They could be of any race, but they fall into that category. Limited resource farmer is also one that we've gotten in the past. And so that has very specific tax bracket questions that is above my head, but there is a self-assessment tool on this website to see if you meet that criteria. Essentially, it's a farmer whose household income is below the poverty line for the county median, which is also a big question or a big thing to answer. So definitely encourage using that self-determination tool that they have. Sweet. Any other questions or things that Hope and Bianca would add?
Well, hey everybody, while we see if another question rolls in, I looked at quite a lot of applications last year and I think Angel did a good job of explaining, but I would just like to say like be confident in your idea, you know what I mean? Whatever project that it is you want to bring forth, just convey that to us in those grant questions. Paint the picture, don't leave out any details and provide your quotes. Let us see that you've done the work, that you know a little bit more about this project. And honestly, there's so many like great ones. I'm so sorry. There's so many great proposals, and we can't, well, the grant committee can't select everybody, but you can for sure take that proposal and use it again all grant season. So if you want to build your cold storage, RAFI's application may be first. Keep using it. Use it, use it, use it. I use my grant proposal all season long, and I may put forth one or two proposals and hope that one or two grants will come back. So that's my advice, guys. Pass it along. Any more questions or any more advice?
I did just think of something that I guess is more of a strategy when applying for grants, especially RAFI grants. So if you get funded for a beginning farmer grant at RAFI, you then cannot apply for the infrastructure grant. So what I would like urge you all to consider is if you've been farming 2.5 years, so you technically fall under beginning, you can go ahead and apply for the beginning farmer stipend. But if you want to think more strategically and be like, or I could apply next year and be eligible for double the amount of funds, that's something to keep in mind. But again, nothing is promised. So even though we've been doing these grants for a few years, who knows what 2026 will hold. But something to think about, since yeah, if you get funded for one grant, you cannot apply for another grant the next year. For the beginning farmer grant, can adding more animals or purchasing seeds be in the grant proposal? Absolutely, yes. Mhm. Sweet. Any other like real specific questions like that? We have a small group, so if you have a specific situation, we have a few more minutes. Feel free to throw it in the chat or come off mute and let us know what conundrum you're thinking through.
Hey Angel, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Good. So this is Takira. I asked the question earlier about the farm number situation on what is determined about the timeline of how long a farmer has been farming. So that's my conundrum that I'm thinking through right now. Um, I guess technically this would be my third full year of growing. In the last two previous years has been without the farm number, but of course doing the work and like selling at farmers markets and such. So I guess that's the conundrum I'm working through right now on which application I would apply for if this is my third year. And my grant proposal will be more focused towards infrastructure base, like a greenhouse and a compost toilet.
Yes. Um, let me. We can chat through. That's my email address, just the same as the grants email address, but it's Angel instead of Grants at RAFI USA in the chat. Um, Feel free to email me and we can like chat through, because it does get confusing if you are a farmer who maybe you start at farming in the middle of the year instead of at like the end of a year or beginning of a year. It can get like pretty hairy. Based on what you said so far, it sounds like you would fall into that farming 3 years or more, since at the time you would be given funding, you would be well into your third year. So I would most likely put you in the category of infrastructure eligibility, but definitely email me like the date you started farming, and whatever other details, and we can definitely chat to know where to fit you. But right now, it sounds like infrastructure is where you would fall.
Okay, I'll email you. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. All right. Any other questions?
Yes, I have a question. So, and again, this one might be a little hyper specific, but we'll see. I do preserving foods and do added value products using items from my garden to make some of those cottage food items. And I wanted to know if one of the things that I wanted to do was to be able to get chickens and create a good housing unit for me because I'm in a city. I'm not in a rural area, so we still have raccoons and foxes. Um, and I wanted to know if, since part of the goal is for the added to be able to provide more items to the added value products, um, would that be something I'd be able to write the grant for? Or do I have to sell straight like vegetables or, byproducts of animals?
Yeah,
Is
I'm
it
glad that you asked that question because that's a great question. So your situation, absolutely. You are growing things, you are turning them into other awesome products. So you would definitely meet that definition of like the farmer we're trying to produce or fund. So yes, definitely. And I didn't mention in here, but the eligibility quiz does cover this. So farms that are more geared toward like solely, so they're donating everything they produce, they're not selling anything. If they are like solely agritourism businesses and not producing products, those entities, businesses are not eligible for these funds. But if you're a producer who is producing, doing value added products, absolutely. And if you're looking to expand your operation by building habitats for livestock, 100% would be an eligible application. Cool. Well, that puts us at time, it looks like. Again, if you have any other like lingering questions, that grants at RAFI email address is a great one to reach out to. Hope has taken on the charge to get the recording out to everyone, the slides too. Hope you can just download them, PDF, whatever you need to do to get those out to everyone. And just as a last tidbit, our grants will be opening in potentially 2.5 weeks. So keep an eye on our newsletter, social media. And yeah, I think that's about it. Chicken processing equipment, random question I see before we hop out of here. That is absolutely able to be funded with these funds for sure. But all right, everyone, I think that is all that we have for you today. I appreciate you all taking your lunch hour to be here. Have a good rest of your day.